Yes, thank you, Mark. Like Philip, I think that much of our bureaucracy has gone awry, but like Sally, I do have a healthy respect for the well-structured bureaucracy that much of government and much of the public depends on. For example, to take Sally's example of the government shutdown, one would not want transportation security agents at the airport to have tremendous discretion over what they'll allow on a plane and what they won't. So you wouldn't want a TSA agent to say, well, this person looks like he's qualified to carry a gun on the plane and this person doesn't. You want clear rules that are clearly and consistently followed. But to talk about how some of our bureaucratic systems are not serving the purpose they were meant to serve, I will descend from the philosophical examples of Max Weber down to the example of the New York City Taxi and Limousine Commission. And first, I'll give you a short tutorial, if some of you don't know, on how New York City government is supposed to work and how some important aspects of New York City government still work. The New York City government was set up so that there's clear political accountability and checks and balances. And it still works this way in transportation, fire department, police department, sanitation, a lot of what government is supposed to do. How does it work? The mayor is elected by the public. The mayor sets broad policies. For example, we want to cut crime without placing an undue burden on minorities with stop, question, and frisk. We want to cut traffic fatalities and make more space for bicyclists and pedestrians on the streets. The mayor appoints commissioners to set the strategies and tactics to carry these broad policies out. There's, of course, oversight and input from the elected city council in terms of approving the budget and approving some, although not all, of these commissioners. If the mayor is not happy with police commissioner, fire commissioner, transportation commissioner, the mayor can ask for that person's resignation and start over with somebody else. So the political accountability there is very clear. But starting in the early 20th century, when the world in New York City got denser and more complicated, government also became denser and more qualified. And a good example of this is the exciting world of taxi cabs. Taxi industry has had 3 existential crises over the 20th century, all roughly 35 years apart. One was in the 1930s during the Depression, when too many drivers, people desperate to make a living, were chasing too few taxi customers, people who didn't have money to take a taxi around town, and so quality slipped. The drivers were idling in empty cars for below subsistence pay. And then what happened then was the city government, through its existing political accountability structures, dealt with the problem and put in place a regulatory regime that worked reasonably well for another 3.5 decades. What did the city do back then? The mayor and the city council put in place a system where a taxi driver had to apply for a taxi medallion, purchase a medallion for $10 from the New York City Police Department. Police Department set up a special bureau to enforce basic standards on licensed taxi cabs, licensed taxi drivers, and so forth. And that, again, that worked well. When did it stop working? It stopped working in the early 1970s. Why is that? Inflation meant that the taxi fare was not worth very much anymore to the taxi driver, the taxi medallion owner. Because they weren't making very much money, the taxi fleets stopped keeping up the cars fell into very poor condition. It was hard to attract quality drivers, so people started to say, the drivers, they don't know where they're going, I'd feel unsafe riding in the cab with these people. And then another phenomenon cropped up, which was what was at the time insensitively called gypsy cabs, where after 35 years of carefully regulating who could drive a cab, enforcement had become lax, and people, again, many of them new immigrants desperate to make a living, would just go out, paint a car yellow in some cases, and illegally pick up passengers, particularly in parts of the city that weren't well served by regulated cabs. And so in the outer boroughs, you had illegal cabs going around trawling for fares. And so what did the city do in the early 70s? It didn't take the same approach as it had in the 30s and work with the city council and the mayor to figure out how do we adjust this regulatory regime for these new challenges. Instead, the city created a new bureaucracy, which was the TLC, the Taxi and Limousine Commission. This is a commission made up of 9 people appointed by the mayor with the advice of the city council. A person has to be, one commissioner has to come from each borough, so the whole city is represented. And the commission was the bureaucratic solution to how will we regulate taxi cabs. It was supposed to have flexibility to deal with all future problems. And the commission's mission is safe, efficient taxi cabs that are sufficiently plentiful. So you think there's lots of leeway for the commission to put in place the right regulations. And indeed, in the 1970s, they did. They licensed the gypsy cabs. They put in new regulations for this new corner of the market. And they started enforcing conditions of the cabs much better. They increased the fares and so forth. But here you come along 35 years later, and there's a new challenge, which is Uber and Lyft and infusion of another crop of tens of thousands of this sort of new iteration of gypsy cabs on the streets. Taxi and Limousine Commission, in theory, has full discretion to be able to regulate these new car services. Sufficiently plentiful cabs, sufficient is a controlling word. The TLC should have had discretion by itself to put in place caps on Uber and Lyft, to apply congestion pricing regime to these vehicles if it wanted to take that approach to controlling the number of vehicles on the streets. But instead it became politically paralyzed. It didn't, essentially, although there are many capable people there that do good enforcement, did not do anything significant for 7, 8 years because the political pressures that used to apply to the city council and the mayor also began to apply to the TLC itself. It had the illusion of independence, but not real independence. And so what had to happen? The city council eventually had to come along after this spate of driver suicides that we've seen over the past 18 months and impose new laws on the TLC, a temporary cap on Uber and Lyft, and new rules that regulate driver pay. State legislature has also come along and imposed a new congestion fee on Uber, Lyft, and existing taxi cabs. So one might ask, why do we have the TLC if it is not empowered in real life, if not on paper, to make the tough, politically difficult decisions that need to be made every once in a while to regulate the evolving taxi industry?